Good afternoon. Let me start, as usual, with the daily report on COVID statistics. The total number of positive cases reported yesterday was 1,712. That represents 19.8% of people newly tested and 9.2% of the total number of tests that were carried out. 584 of the new cases were in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, 457 in Lanarkshire, 192 in Lothian and 151 in Ayrshire and Arran. The remaining cases were spread across 9 other Health Board regions. Only the Western Isles didn't have any cases reported yesterday. The total number of cases therefore now stands at 52,615. I can also report that 928 people are currently in hospital, which is an increase of 55 from yesterday, and 74 people are in intensive care. That is one more than yesterday. But I regret to say that in the past 24 hours, a further 17 deaths were registered of patients who first tested positive over the previous 28 days. The total number of deaths under that daily measurement is therefore now 2,670. That reminds us again of how devastating COVID can be, and I want again to convey my deepest condolences to everyone who has lost a loved one. Later today, the Scottish Government will publish our latest estimate for the R number in Scotland. The R number, as you know, is the number of people who, on average, and I stress on average, will be infected by one other infectious person. Based on the most up-to-date figures available, but I would remind you that there is always a lag time between introducing new measures and results from those measures showing up in our statistics. But based on the most up-to-date figures we can use, the R number in Scotland is again estimated to be above 1, perhaps as high as 1.5 at this stage. That fact, together with the statistics for today, illustrates again why we took the decision yesterday to extend the temporary restrictions for a further week to help get the R number back below 1. And it also emphasises the importance of the new strategic framework for tackling COVID that we are publishing tomorrow, and I will say more about that in the daily update then. Today, I want to briefly update on 3 other points. Firstly, I want to highlight, because it's important, but it might otherwise get overlooked tomorrow, that the Office of National Statistics will be publishing tomorrow the initial results of the COVID infection survey in Scotland. The survey estimates how many people in private households were infected with COVID over a 2-week period of time. The results published tomorrow will cover the 2 weeks up until last Friday. We had originally expected that these results would only become available in November, but because levels of participation have been high, they will be published earlier than expected, and I want to thank everyone who has taken part. The sample size for the survey will increase further in the weeks and months to come, and as that happens, we'll be able to get even more detailed information, such as the characteristics of people who are testing positive. And we'll also find out more about the number of people who test positive for antibodies, which indicates how many people are likely to have had the virus previously. So if you get asked to take part in this survey, and if you feel that you're in a position to do so, I would encourage you again to volunteer, because you are helping us deepen our knowledge and understanding of the virus and giving us an additional tool to track the spread and prevalence of the virus and tailor our response to it accordingly. The second point I want to highlight is that tomorrow's paper will include details of our new testing strategy, and that paper, of course, being the Scottish Government's strategic framework document. One key part of that is our plan to increase testing capacity to 65,000 tests a day over the rest of this year, by the end of this year. To achieve that, we expect Scotland's share of the UK Government's lighthouse laboratory capacity to increase by at least a further 10,000 tests a day. Some smaller partner laboratories, including some commercial partners, will also be able to process more than 3,500 tests a day. And most significantly, our NHS laboratories, which only handle tests from Scotland, will increase their capacity by a further 22,000 tests a day. The increase in NHS capacity will be driven by the establishment of 3 regional hubs. These will be based in Grampian, Lothian and Greater Glasgow and Clyde. Contractors are already carrying out building works for these hubs. Installation of equipment is progressing at pace, and so is staff recruitment. So we expect these to be up and running within the next few weeks. We plan to maximise use of these hubs by ensuring that they undertake all of our routine care home testing. NHS labs already undertake around 10,000 care home tests a week of the total of somewhere between 30 and 40,000 that are done every week, but that volume will increase significantly as this new NHS capacity comes on stream. And that will ensure that we get results from care home tests back more quickly than we sometimes do now. And it shows how our increased capacity will be able to be used to protect those most at risk, such as people in care homes, as well as enabling the rapid testing of people with symptoms. The final issue I want to briefly cover today relates to some additional support that has been announced this morning for residential outdoor education centres. Our Curriculum for Excellence rightly emphasises the importance for young people of spending time outdoors. Outdoor education centres across the country give tens of thousands of school children the opportunity to do that and also to experience activities which they might not otherwise have the chance to enjoy. But we know the outdoor education sector has had a really tough time, as many people have had as a result of the pandemic. It was closed through lockdown, and residential stays at outdoor centres are still not allowed. In addition, even in order to allow non-residential activities to take place, centres have had to make great efforts to create a safe environment for young people and staff. So I'm pleased today that we've been able to announce an additional £2 million of support to help residential outdoor education centres. I know this won't address all of the difficulties that the sector faces, but I hope it will provide some additional reassurance to managers and staff in these centres. And I also hope that by allowing more centres to operate more effectively, that funding will also help young people across the country still have that experience of outdoor learning and activity. These were the main issues I wanted to briefly cover today. The Chief Nursing Officer and I will now take questions from the media. But before I do that, let me just round my remarks to a close as usual by reminding everyone of the key current rules and guidelines in place. If you live in Lothian, Lanarkshire, Forth Valley, Ayrshire and Arran and Greater Glasgow and Clyde, you should not travel outside the health board area that you live in unless you have a clear need to do that. And people in the rest of Scotland should not travel to any of these 5 areas unless they have a clear need to do that. None of us in any part of Scotland, unfortunately, should be visiting each other's homes at the moment, except for very specific exceptions, such as childcare or looking after a vulnerable person. And of course, when we do meet people from other households, predominantly outdoors, but sometimes in indoor public places like cafes, the maximum group size we should be meeting in is 6, and those 6 people should not come from more than 2 different households. In addition, please avoid car sharing if you possibly can, work from home if you possibly can, and employers, please allow your workers to do that if possible. Download the Protect Scotland app if you haven't already done so, and finally remember to wear face coverings when you're out and about. Remember to avoid places with crowds of people. Remember to clean your hands as often as you possibly can, and clean hard surfaces more regularly than you would usually do, because the virus can hang about on them. And remember to keep 2 metres distance from people from other households that you are coming into contact with. And remember, lastly, to self-isolate immediately and book a test if you experience a fever, high temperature, or a new continuous cough, or a loss of or change in your sense of taste or smell. These are the symptoms of COVID that we are asking everybody to be very alert to. By following all of these rules, each one of us as individuals plays our part in stopping the virus transmitting and keeping levels of it, or in some cases getting levels of it back to safer levels. And if we all do that, then we minimise the need for additional restrictions on businesses or on our activities as individual citizens. So it's really important that we all act in the way that limits the ability of this virus to transmit. It is a virus, like so many viruses, that thrives on human contact. So it will spread the more opportunities we give it by coming together with other people. and it will die and find it difficult to spread if we take every opportunity to limit our interaction with other people. That's really tough for human beings who want to be with our friends and our family and interact normally with those we love. But that is the way we stop this virus spreading, and I hope enable all of us to get back to a greater sense of normality sooner rather than later. Thank you very much for listening. We will move straight to questions now, but the Chief Nursing Officer will assist me with the answers to those questions, and I'll go firstly to Louise Scott from STV.
Thank you, First Minister. Just really like to ask whether Scots should begin planning for a digital Christmas.
Look, this is really tough stuff, and I've seen Jason Leitch's comments this morning, and I've seen the totality of his comments, and what he's trying to do is be frank with people about the reality we live in, and not prematurely rule things out, but equally not try to give people false assurance, and that's the really difficult balance we're trying to strike right now. I want us to be able to celebrate Christmas as normally as it is possible to do within the context of a global pandemic. And my message to people is that the more we all stick with these really difficult restrictions right now, the more chance there will be of us doing that. And some of the really tough additional things that government is deciding right now, restrictions on hospitality, for example, and any other restrictions we feel necessary to put in place, will also be in part about trying to deal decisively with an upsurge in the virus now so that we give ourselves the best chance of greater normality at Christmas. And that's part of the objective that we're all working to right now. But Christmas this year, probably for no country anywhere, is going to be absolutely normal without any restrictions. And you know, I could do what politicians probably do in normal times. I could stand here and try to tell you otherwise and think, well, I'll let people down nearer the time. That's not the right approach right now. So we are unlikely to be able to celebrate Christmas with no limits on the people in our houses and no limits to what we do. But the more we get this virus under control right now, the greater normality, the greater chance of having some ability to interact with our loved ones we will have. And I know people want me to stand here right now and just say definitively, here's what the rules will be on Christmas Day. If I was forced to do that right now, if Christmas Day was tomorrow, it would be a pretty harsh thing I would have to say to people. But Christmas Day is not tomorrow. So let's try and work as hard as we can just now so that we do get greater normality, even if it is not 100% normality. And I will just try, and Jason and Fiona and others will try to be as frank with people as possible. Because I think the worst thing we could do right now would be to try to do, as I say, what politicians have sometimes got a tendency to do, tell people what they want to hear to make it easy in the here and now and you know, worry about changing course later on. I've tried every day to give people as honest and as straightforward a message as possible, and I think that gets more important the further into this we go, and certainly the closer we get to that Christmas period. Fiona, do you want to add anything?
I think, as the First Minister said, Christmas is some time away, albeit we are encouraging people to, if they possibly can, Christmas shop early so that we can reduce the crowding within shops, because the 2 metre distance is so incredibly important. But there are a number of the 14-day cycles to go. So we know if when people follow the rules, keep distance, clean surfaces, wear face coverings, reduce mixing, because this is a virus that relies on us to churn it and to let it grow. So in a way, it's in our hands. If we can pull back, restrict the social interactions that we have according to the rules, according to where we're staying, then we will get back to a more even keel and a more even balance within our society, which is what we all want to do. And the one thing then that we can do is follow the rules, make sure that we're conforming to what we need to do to restrict the transmission of the virus. And I think, importantly, it will protect our NHS, it will protect our clinical services, as well as hopefully give us a peaceful holiday period.
Lucy White from BBC.
Hi there, First Minister. Just to ask for your reaction to the funding that the Chancellor has just announced through the Job Support Scheme, and for your reaction to that, but also your reaction to the news that we're getting that some hospitality businesses are starting to take legal action against the restrictions against councils.
On the Chancellor's announcements, I've not had the opportunity to study them in detail because he was just making them shortly before I came to do today's briefing. I've seen the headlines of them, obviously. On the face of it, they look positive. Any additional support for business right now is positive, so I think it is important to say that. Obviously, we want to understand the detail of them and understand what they mean in terms of additional funding to the Scottish Government. Extra support for the job support scheme will, flow directly to businesses, but some of what he has announced around additional grant support or introducing grant support in England for businesses that are not required to close but have their trading restricted, that's where we need to understand it a bit more. We have been providing some support for businesses in that category already, but doing it from within our own resources. It would be good to be able to offer more, but we don't have clarity yet on the extent to which that is going to deliver additional funding to the Scottish Government, because it will be us that have to pay for that. So I understand there's some discussions between Scottish Government officials and Treasury officials later, in fact, early this afternoon, so hopefully we'll have greater clarity there as well. I still think there is an argument that things have to go further, and particularly around the level of wage subsidy to workers, because we're talking, and it's very important, about support for business here, and obviously support for business is an important part of protecting jobs and workers, but the element of the job support scheme, which is about the amount of money in workers' pay packets at the end of the month, I think there is still a need to try and get improvement there and push that back up to the levels that we saw earlier in the pandemic, and we'll continue to make that case. Every business, every individual, we operate even in a pandemic within the rule of law, and we've had to have emergency laws put in place to deal with the quite unique challenges of a global pandemic. But even then, we have to operate within a legal framework, and that gives every individual and every business the right, if they choose to challenge that. And so I would not criticise businesses for doing that, even if I might wish it was different. And also with any legal action, it's important that I don't say anything that might prejudice the outcome of that. What I would say generally, though, and it's not really a comment specifically about businesses taking legal action, it's about the overall impact on business, and that is particularly hospitality right now and the supply chain for hospitality. People in that sector are entirely understandably stressed and anxious and deeply worried about the future of their businesses and the future of their jobs. And, when I talk about the buck stopping here, that includes people, wanting to criticise and be angry at the decisions government is taking. I understand that, and I accept that as part of my job, as part of the burden. They're, carrying a heavy burden in terms of the day-to-day conditions of their business. Part of the burden I carry is making these decisions and taking the consequences and being accountable for them. I suppose all I will keep stressing is that these decisions are not taken lightly. The idea that I willingly or lightly put restrictions on businesses' ability to operate is just could not be further from the truth. We are in the most horrendous situation right now of trying to balance and minimise the health and life impact of a potentially very dangerous virus with the need to minimise the impact of the economy. And these are not easy decisions, and the impacts of them are not easy. But we are not doing these things voluntarily. We're doing them because they are necessary to deal with the situation that we find ourselves in. Cian Jenkins from Channel 4.
First Minister, in late August, you said it would be a disservice to hold a public inquiry into care home deaths, as it would divert attention at mid-pandemic. We understand the police are now actively investigating care home deaths at scale and interviewing care home staff, sometimes for hours. Is that also diverting attention at a time of crisis?
As you know, Kieran, it would be completely unacceptable for me to pass any comment or opinion on what the police do. The police act independently to investigate where they consider there is a need to do that, and I would not gainsay or pass comment on that. I take very seriously my responsibility and the responsibility of the government to do everything we feasibly and reasonably can to protect people in care homes, to learn lessons from the past as we go into and cope with a second wave of this virus, and also to make sure that as we come out of this, there is, in whatever form this takes, proper learning and, where necessary, accountability. I've got to make judgments all along about, I work in this building every day. I see the pressures that Scottish Government civil servants are under trying to cope with the day-to-day pressures of a global pandemic. And I have judgments to make about how we best use our resources to deal with what is in front of us. My judgment up until now has been that diverting, and that sounds like a loaded word and I don't mean it to, a lot of that effort into a public inquiry now, while we are still dealing with the reality on a day-to-day basis of these things, would not be the right thing to do. But that in no way, shape or form should detract from the importance I attach to proper process to scrutinise what we have done in the past, what we are doing now, what we will do in the future, and to learn lessons and apply accountability to that. These are judgments, and the one I've just outlined there, it's one of a multitude of different judgments I've got to try and balance on a day-to-day basis. I'm not saying that will always be the judgment I come to, because I keep all of these things under review, but that's the judgment I have arrived at up until now. And I think no doubt people will make up their own minds as to whether I'm right about this, but I think the majority of people want me and all of the efforts of the government right now focused on trying to get through the reality that we still face right now of an ongoing, developing global pandemic.
If I may follow up, First Minister, perhaps I can ask it this way then. Should the government and yourself not be held to the same standard as hard-working frontline carers?
I think we should be held to a higher standard, to be perfectly honest. I'm taking the decisions. I'm not suggesting before you sort of came to a conclusion that I was, that standing here every day answering your questions is the same as the proper scrutiny and accountability of a public inquiry. But yes, I think we should be held to a high standard, but I also think part of being held to a high standard is not taking my eye off the ball of dealing with this situation now. We have a virus that is accelerating again across the world, across Europe, across the UK and here in Scotland. We see outbreaks again in care homes, although we have a variety of different protective measures in place in care homes, additional to what we had earlier in the pandemic. But I've got to keep my eye on that ball. That's not, people can reach their own conclusions based on their views of me if they want, but that is not about trying to evade scrutiny. That is about trying to do, to the best of my ability on a daily basis during a global crisis, the best I can every single day to keep people safe. And that's just how it is. And people can make their own minds up and draw their own conclusions about that. But, I don't tend to evade scrutiny. And I haven't evaded scrutiny in the course of this pandemic, and I will not seek to evade scrutiny in the weeks, months, and however long lies ahead. But often in positions like mine, it's a question of the priorities you have to give to the multitude of things you have to deal with. And right now, my priority, literally every day, is to try to make sure that collectively the government and all our partners across Scotland are doing the things that they need to do to keep people as safe as possible. And that's the judgment I make. And people will make their own judgments, and I'll face, of course, and this is not me trying to put this into the political sphere, it's putting it very firmly in the democratic accountability sphere. I will face the judgment of the Scottish people in an election before too long. So there's no lack of scrutiny, nor should there be, and nor will I ever try to evade it. Natalie Crawford from Bauer.
Thank you, First Minister. Clyde One is hearing of non-emergency surgeries being cancelled in one hospital due to the number of COVID patients in ICU. Can you tell us what's been done to protect the health service to ensure we don't see the scale of cancellations we saw at the start of this pandemic? And can I ask, do you have any updates about Halloween and whether or not children will be able to go guising next week?
Two parts of that question, although they might not on the face of it seem all that connected, are inextricably connected. What are we doing to try to protect the NHS right now? It's what we're doing to try to protect life and health. We're trying to act in a way and encourage everybody across Scotland to act in a way, and at times placing very tough restrictions on people's ability to act normally, so that we're all acting in a way that stops this virus spreading. That's how we protect our NHS. And one of the reasons right now that we're having to contemplate and put into force some really tough restrictions is so that we don't have our NHS overwhelmed. We have rising numbers of patients in intensive care and in our hospitals. We are not yet anywhere, we're not at the levels we saw earlier in the year, but we do see levels that we have to act and take seriously. I mean, if I look at ICU in the based on, obviously we publish official statistics, but based on our management statistics, more than 40 patients were admitted to ICU in the week up to the 21st of October. Now, at the peak in April, 155 patients were admitted in a week. So we're way off that, but it is rising. Similarly with hospital admissions, in the most recent week, more than 500 admissions to hospital. At the peak in April, that was 1,200 in a week. So it's not there yet, but it is rising. So that is one of the things that lead me as First Minister and the government to say we have to act. However difficult it is, we have to act to stop the virus spreading, because these hospital figures, you heard Jason and I talk about this yesterday, they are lag indicators. They reflect people who were infected maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that's why we have to act and put horrible restrictions on people's ability to live absolutely normally. And that comes back to Halloween. I can't tell you how much I hate having to stand here and talk about restricting the ability of kids to go out guising. But we're in a global pandemic. Hopefully we'll never have to face this again in another year. This is hopefully a once in a century thing that we'll all have to live through. But we'll put out some official guidance. I can't believe we're having to issue official guidance on Halloween, but that's the situation we're in, probably over the weekend. But it is not safe right now to do these things as normal. And, it would not be fair of me or right of me to say otherwise. So to parents, to children, think of ways in which you can celebrate, if that's what we do at Halloween, in a way that is safe and doesn't have children or others coming into unnecessary contact with others. But we'll put out a little bit of guidance on that over the weekend to help parents in particular navigate their way through this. Fraser Knight from Global.
Thank you, First Minister. Just again, picking up on Jason Leitch's comments this morning around a digital Christmas. You've said that Christmas isn't going to look anywhere near normal as we know it. We've also been in touch with the Scottish Santa School, and even Santa himself says he's preparing for Zoom appearances in grottos. I was just wondering what reassurances you can give to children and young people, but also to young families, that Christmas will not be cancelled and that they can still celebrate it. But also, First Minister, you've said that some of the restrictions that are in place now are there to try and save Christmas. And indeed, one person that we spoke to on the street today said that, if there are still restrictions in place at Christmas, he won't be listening to them. He's still planning to go home and see his family. Do you think that Christmas could be the point where you lose public trust if it doesn't go ahead as normal?
Look, that's my focus right now, is doing what I think is right. And I don't do this right now to be popular. And so if I was to start making decisions on Christmas based on whether they would make me popular or not, I should get out of it, because I wouldn't be doing a service to the country. I commented on this yesterday when I said earlier in the week that the buck has to stop here with these decisions. Some people interpreted that as, kind of control freakery. It's not. It's just basically this is my job. I have to be responsible for the difficult decisions, and I don't wish these decisions right now on anybody. But they have to be taken, and they have to be taken with a cool, objective sense of what's right for the safety of the country. And if they make me unpopular, that's just something I'm going to have to live with. Plenty other people out there in businesses and across the country are dealing with a much bigger problem than just that. So that's not a factor in my decision making. On Christmas, I'm tempted to try to take a bit of light relief here by saying that since I'm spending so much time responding to Jason's comments today, I should make him dress up as the Grinch for Halloween and do a briefing in that to cheer everybody up. I think I've probably made sure that Jason's going to be pictured in many newspapers tomorrow dressed up as the Grinch. So sorry, Jason, in advance. Obviously, I'm joking. And firstly, on Santa, I'm pretty sure if there are any kids watching, in fact, I'm not sure, I know Santa, it will not be prevented from delivering your presents on Christmas Eve. Santa is a key worker and he's got lots of magic powers that make him safe to do that. So if he's having to do grotto appearances by Zoom, that's to keep you safe. It's not that Santa's at any risk. Santa will be delivering presents across the world as normal. I want us to have as much normality at Christmas as possible, and that's why it's not the only reason, obviously, but it's one of the reasons why I'm asking people to do really tough things now, to see if we can get the virus back to levels that open up a bit more normality at Christmas. Can I guarantee it right now? No, I wish I could, because make my life easier apart from anything else, but I can't, and I'm not going to stand here and give people false assurances that I don't know whether I can deliver. But I really hope that that's the case, but it does depend on all of us doing all these tough things right now. And then hopefully getting to a point at Christmas where we can ease up a bit and enjoy, if not a Christmas that is 100% normal, then a Christmas that at least is more normal than what we're living with right now. And my last point on this, I'm having to take these decisions with my colleagues across government right now, because that's our job and our responsibility. But I'm not exempt from the impact of these decisions. And don't ever think that I'm sitting in some room here just deciding, we'll just cancel Christmas or we'll shut pubs. You know, I'm a human being. The thought of Christmas without my family upsets me as much as that thought upsets you. None of us want to be living with this right now. And I'm just trying to be as frank with people as possible about the realities of what we face, which countries the world over are facing, but also the things that if we all do them might make our progress and journey through this pandemic a bit easier, particularly at times like Christmas. And so I said that was the last thing. Well, the last thing is there are people in our country, people in our Jewish community, people in our Muslim community, people in our Sikh and Hindu communities that have already gone through their equivalents of Christmas under these restrictions. So I'm not saying that makes it okay if we can't have a normal Christmas. It doesn't. But remember, there are many of our fellow Scots that have already gone through these really upsetting, important celebrations without the ability to mark them in exactly a normal way. And that's Hassan from Kingdom FM.
Thank you, First Minister, for the opportunity once again. Good afternoon. Last night, news broke that a major contract at the BiFab yards in Fife for an offshore wind farm was on the brink of collapse. Now, I appreciate it isn't directly related to coronavirus, but it couldn't have come at a worse time amid the economic effects of the pandemic. So what is your response to claims that ministers have simply walked away from the sector? And in the midst of a pandemic and a recession, what hope can you give to people whose livelihoods depend on work like this?
The one thing I'm going to be relatively brief because I know how important it is to people in BiFab and in the areas where BiFab is, but to the country as a whole. So I'm going to answer the question, but I won't go into answer it at great length because I don't want to take the focus away from COVID at the briefings. But I want to be very clear, the government has not walked away from BiFab and will not walk away from BiFab. We have, since 2017, done everything in our power to secure a future for BiFab. We have, for example, invested almost £40 million through equity and loan facilities, and we currently have more than a 30% equity stake in BiFab. So I think even our worst critics could not accuse us of not caring and not striving to do everything we can to secure its future, and we will continue to do that. But in terms of the provision of public money, of taxpayers' money to businesses, we operate within the confines of the law and the confines of state aid. So we come up against very firm limits in what we can do, and that's the position we have reached at the moment in terms of the particular issue that you refer to. But that does not mean we will not continue to do everything we can and leave no stone unturned in our efforts to try to secure the future of BiFab. Neil Pooran from PA.
Thanks, First Minister. On the issue of care home visiting, you might have seen on social media a video released by the Care Home Relatives Scotland group. It shows a 104-year-old resident at a care home in Glenrothes called Mary Fowler, and she's desperate to see her family again. She hasn't had very much contact for the past several months, and in her words, "It's cutting me to bits, please help." Many relatives of people in care homes feel that the new rules haven't made that much of a difference to the extent they're able to see their families. So ahead of the strategic framework coming out, what hope can you offer them around visiting care homes? And if you can update us, please, on any discussions around testing of relatives of people in care homes.
I'll hand over to the Chief Nursing Officer to talk more about this. Just by way of introduction, though, this is one of the many heartbreakingly difficult balances that we've got to try to strike. I haven't seen the video on social media that you refer to, but I will make a point of seeing it later on. And to Mary, you know, I just am heart sorry for the position you're in and the position your family's in, and that's replicated many times over across the country. But we have to keep people in care homes as safe as possible. The new guidance is not a panacea, and it could never be in the current context, but it is about trying to get back to some normality for people for whom visits from their family are not just visits, they are a key part of their quality of life and the care of them too. But you'll recall when the Health Secretary published that guidance just a couple of weeks ago, there was pushback from the other perspective of people saying we were opening up too much and therefore putting care home residents at risk. This is a really difficult balance to get right. You know, we've just had the question, very legitimate question from Kieran Jenkins at Channel 4 about in due course a public inquiry into what has happened in care homes. I don't think any of us, I know I won't ever forget the impact of the numbers of people in care homes who died earlier in the year, and we are determined to do everything we can to avoid that happening in the next wave of this virus. So there's just no easy way through this. We're trying to get it as right as possible. On testing, we're going to set more of this out tomorrow, but testing of designated visitors going into care homes, those who regularly go, is one of the priorities for the extension of testing into other asymptomatic groups.
First Minister said our care home residents are some of our most vulnerable in Scotland, because what we do know is age is a really critical factor in determining what happens to you if you do catch COVID-19, and that can often lead either to long COVID or to death. And the challenge for all of us is, how do we protect our care home residents, support our care home staff to deliver care, and do that in a way that supports families to be together. We know that having family members is essential for people who are living in care homes. And the blunt instrument that we had to take at the beginning of the pandemic of restricting visiting, we now know cannot be sustained in terms of the resident in particular. So I do understand the distress that it causes families not being able to be with their loved one, but clearly the resident who desperately wants to be hugged by their daughter or their son, and those particularly with a cognitive impairment, people who have dementia, just to feel safe by their son, daughter, husband, wife, being with them, and being with them for an extended period of time can help them eat, and we know that is now as essential as protecting people from COVID-19. And what we're determined to do is find a path, navigate our way through these really high risks for people who live in care homes, because it's not like someone who is over 100 living in their own home. So clearly at the moment there would be restrictions to visiting, but they would only be risking their own lives if they were having visitors. What happens with visitors in care homes, of course, is there are other people, 10, 20, upward of that number, who are living in the home who are also at risk. Our care home owners are working tirelessly to make sure that we put the right systems in place so that we can protect the residents. And we are working hard. We know that testing is going to be part of the solution, part of that equation that balances the life of people so that we don't catch COVID and become unwell, with that psychological and emotional well-being, that we're seeing it as of equal value, and therefore we're determined to navigate a path through and put that in place where appropriate, because clearly if there is an outbreak in the home, whether it was COVID-19 or winter vomiting, we wouldn't have visitors. But where appropriate, we're determined to be able to navigate a path through and support that designated visitor to be with their loved one safely and well.
Thanks, Fiona. Derek Healy from the Courier.
Thank you, First Minister. Many hospitality businesses operating outside the Central Belt say they've not been legally forced to close, but that the current restrictions make operating impossible for them. Those businesses say that under the current financial support, they're receiving around half of what their counterparts in Central Scotland, who are legally forced to close, receive. So do you think that's fair? And how will that be addressed in support packages going forward?
None of this is fair, so I'm not going to stand here and use this word, that word in any context here. A global pandemic is really unfair in what it does to people and to businesses and to life generally. We're trying to be as fair as possible, though, within that context. I said in response to an earlier question that we have, unlike, I think, in England up until the Chancellor's announcement today, we have made support available for businesses that are not legally required to close but who have their trading restricted. Hopefully, as a result of the Chancellor's announcement today, that will enable us to increase that level of support. We just need to have a better understanding than we do right now of whether that announcement is going to actually deliver extra cash for the Scottish Government to pay for that, but we would want to do that. And we have to put packages together that recognise that there is a difference. And I appreciate that this difference in practice may be less than it appears to be in theory, but there is a difference between a business that is just not allowed legally to open and one that has restrictions on it but can still stay open and trade in some way. So there is always going to be a difference in the support that is provided. We try to make this as fair as possible. We have funding constraints, which is why trying to persuade the UK government to do more here is so important, and also make sure that anything more they do comes through to the Scottish Government in extra cash. And it means that we have to try and limit the circumstances in which we are requiring businesses to close or restrict their trading. But when we do, have the fairest possible system of support in place that we can. And that's what we will continue to strive to do. David Ball from the Herald.
Thank you, First Minister. Can I ask for some clarity on the lowest tier you're proposing introducing in the new framework? Yesterday you said it would be the level we would be aspiring to this side of getting a vaccine. Can I ask whether some island communities such as Orkney or Shetland could go straight into that band if low prevalence rates continue over the next couple of weeks? And if that's not seen as appropriate, could Orkney, for example, be managed outside of the framework if mitigations such as travel restrictions were in place?
We're not anticipating managing any parts of the country outside of the framework. The framework is meant to be one that all of the country can operate within. It could apply nationally, but it is more likely to apply on a regional or local basis. And basically what we're trying to do here is, without surrendering the flexibility completely that we need to manage an infectious virus, give greater clarity and certainty and get away, if possible, from a one-size-fits-all approach. Get away from a situation where one part of the country is living under restrictions that are designed for a part of the country with much higher transmission of the virus. And this opens that up, but with any differentiated approach, it brings with it greater complexity. So again, you know, I keep using this phraseology, and it's not intended to evade answers to the questions. It's just trying to explain that in all of this, we're trying to strike the best possible balance, recognising there is no perfect balance given the nature of what we're dealing with right now. The lowest one, I'm not going to get into this in detail because we will set it out tomorrow, and over the course of next week we'll then make decisions about which parts of the country would have which level applying to it. And for some parts of the country, that may mean an easing of restrictions. Unfortunately, for other parts of the country, it may mean a continuation of current restrictions or even a tightening of those restrictions. But we haven't taken those decisions yet because we want to take those decisions on the basis of the most up-to-date data that we have. But the lowest level will be, I think I did describe it yesterday, as close to normality as it's probably feasible to get without a more effective treatment or vaccine. And, you know, roughly equivalent to what phase 3 of our route map would have been had we implemented phase 3 in total. So not a complete absence of restrictions at all, but fewer restrictions and much greater normality in our everyday lives than we have right now, for example. So that's it in general terms, but obviously over tomorrow and into next week, the detail of this will be set out more and the decisions about the practical application of it will be taken. Gina Davidson from the Scotsman.
Hi, thanks, First Minister. Can I just ask, we've been contacted by parents and youth football clubs who are concerned about the restrictions that are on at the moment. Can you give them any kind of advice about whether or not children who maybe live in one different health board area to another can still travel for training and games, even if it's just 15-20 minutes down the road, but they're obviously in a different health board area, because it seems to be having quite a big impact on youth football?
There's lots of aspects of this having a big impact on all sorts of things, and I deeply regret all of it, particularly these areas where the impact is on children and young people, which I don't want to see and nobody wants to see. Our general advice is for people within the 5 health board areas with the more severe restrictions is they shouldn't be travelling outside of their own health board area unless it is necessary. And people should not be travelling into these areas unless it is necessary. And I come back to, you know, the central point I've made many times today. The more we agree to abide by these really tough things right now, difficult though it is, and, you know, even though we all hate it terribly, the more chance we have of getting greater normality back later in the year and around the Christmas period. I'll get my colleagues to come back to you later if there is any more specific advice particular to youth football that either we are giving or are able to give. I don't want to say that right now without having the opportunity to check that to make sure we get it right and don't give anybody any false information.
No, I think as the First Minister says, it's about essential, and whilst we know how essential exercise and companionship is, I think at the moment the rate that the virus is transmitting, we are expecting people not to travel unless it is absolutely essential, so for education or for essential work, and we're expecting people to stay within the health board boundaries, and by everyone doing that, then we will get back to people being able to travel as soon as possible when the virus has come under control.
Christine Lavelle from The Sun.
Thank you, First Minister. Your testing strategy in August talked about building our capacity for winter to 65,000 tests per day. Today that you said that you aim to reach that 65,000 by the end of this year. What's the reason for the delay in building capacity? And just also on Professor Leitch's comments, Age Scotland have pointed out today that a huge number of older people don't have the option for a digital Christmas because they don't have access to smartphones and other technology. So what would this mean for them?
Can we just get away from, sorry Jason if you're watching right now, can we just get away from fixing everything on the terminology of a digital Christmas? Jason was using shorthand to illustrate the fact that Christmas, while we hope it will be more normal than life right now, will not be 100% normal. We recognise that everybody experiences that differently, and we try to factor that into our decisions, and we try to support people. We've taken lots of steps over the course of the pandemic to improve access to digital services for people because they are so much more essential. But let's not lose sight of the fact that we are trying, through what we're doing right now, to open up as much normality as we can by the time we get to the Christmas period. I wouldn't describe our building of capacity as delayed. The figures I've given you today are the minimum. We're actually being quite cautious, particularly around what we estimate for an increased, not an increased share, but a share of an increased UK Lighthouse laboratory capacity. We're erring on the side of pessimism about that. We actually hope that it will be higher than that. So, we're just giving the best possible estimates with trying to avoid optimism bias as we go. And equally, when I say the end of the year, that's the same thing. The regional hubs that are under construction literally right now will come into play at over the next few weeks. So we're doing this as quickly as possible. Winter lasts well beyond the end of this year. But what I would say is that we don't have, in terms of the demand for testing right now, obviously we want to expand the groups that we test, but we have capacity. We don't have a shortage of capacity right now. We sometimes have frustrations about turnaround times. So the overall message I want to give to people is if you have symptoms, make sure you're taking up the opportunity to get tested. Rachel Watson from the Daily Mail.
Thank you, First Minister. Just on Christmas again, does the tier system mean that some families across Scotland and in some areas could enjoy a more relaxed family-orientated Christmas than others, so it would be based on where you live? And also just on testing capacity, you spoke about regular care home visitors being a priority. Could you tell us where else that testing capacity could go for? What other groups are you looking at to extend testing to?
I have done, I think, several times over the past wee while. So we are looking at extending testing within the NHS to patients and groups of staff. We are looking to extend testing to people who work in the care sector, but work in people's own homes, care at home services, not just staff who work in care homes, and, as I've already mentioned today, visitors to care homes. But we'll set out more around this in our paper tomorrow. On the first part of your question, people, we need to understand, and I'm not going to answer this question with particular relevance to Christmas, because I know what, and I don't mean this disparagingly before you sort of think I don't, but I know what headlines you want to write here, and I don't think it's fair to people to start, having banner headlines saying, oh, some people might get a better Christmas than others. So I'm not going to feed that if I can possibly avoid it. But by definition, a level system, I said it a moment ago in response to another question, it is about moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach. Some people might take the view that's the wrong thing to do, that if people in Glasgow are having to live under certain restrictions, then people in the Highlands should live under exactly the same restrictions. That's legitimate. Nobody has the 100% right or wrong answers to this, but we're just trying to get this as right as we can and strike the best balances we can. What we are seeking to do, though, is move to a situation where if there is a particular surge in the virus in parts of Scotland, as we are particularly worried right now about Lanarkshire, for example, and you can see why on today's figures. And if that necessitates stricter measures at any time of the year for Lanarkshire, but in the Highlands, prevalence is still quite low, that we don't have to put the same severe restrictions on people in the Highlands. So that's what we're trying to get to. And yeah, that sometimes will lead to people in one part of the country feeling a bit harder done by than people in another part of the country. But the flip of that is that everybody suffers the same restrictions no matter the level of the virus. So, take your pick and decide which you think is better. And I'm not going to say you're wrong if you reach a different conclusion to me, because there's no perfect answer here. We're just trying to get this balance as right as we can and have the fewest number of people at any time under the fewest possible restrictions at any time that is consistent with stopping the virus spiralling out of control. Emma Saith from Times Educational Supplement.
Thank you, First Minister. Today we're running a story on the Test Scotland website about Scottish teachers who are at high risk from COVID, saying they feel abandoned by the government. They say some councils are overturning medical advice and occupational health advice that says they should be working from home. And as coronavirus cases rise, they say they're becoming increasingly anxious and scared. What can you say to reassure these teachers they've not been forgotten by the government as it prioritises keeping schools open? And what would you say to the councils who are taking a hard line when it comes to at-risk teachers working from home?
Nobody's been forgotten by the government. Teachers haven't been forgotten. I readily understand why everybody feels right now that, you know, perhaps their situation should be given greater priority to other things. I think that's natural, it's understandable. I'm not going to stand here and complain about it, but all I can say is that nobody's been forgotten. We're trying to make sure that the interests of every group, every part of the country, every sector of the economy, every business are catered for and factored into our thinking as much as possible. But again, I come back to this formulation, there are balances we're having to strike, and keeping young people in education, we have, and I think there is vast majority support for this across the country. Keeping young people in education is right up there as one of our top priorities for all the reasons people understand. We have taken steps. So, for example, right now, any teacher or any member of school staff, and this is not the same in every workplace across the country, but in education, any member of staff in a school, if they fear they have been exposed to COVID, can access testing. And I think that's an important protection amongst a whole suite of other protections. And councils, like any employers, should be responsible and should prioritise the safety and well-being of their workers. And councils, as regards teachers, are not exempt from that any more than a private sector employer with staff in a manufacturing facility would be exempt from that. So councils have to take account of the individual circumstances of staff members, any particular health circumstances, and make sure that they respond appropriately to that. Georgina Hayes from the sorry, I was going to ask the Chief Nursing Officer to maybe add something there.
Just adding to what the First Minister said about health needs, and our teachers are doing an incredible job in really difficult and challenging circumstances, and they have been, when we were in lockdown, a real lifeline to vulnerable children and obviously to essential workers, children, giving clinicians in particular, if I'm talking about the NHS, support so that they could do their work. So they have been doing an incredibly difficult job under demanding circumstances, and we're very, very grateful to them. We recognise that people with predisposing health conditions need additional support and advice and nuancing, and along with the levels of where the prevalence of COVID-19 is higher, then we are looking at how we nuance that advice and give that advice to individual people, some of whom will be teachers, and we would expect their employers to be able to nuance that. Now, working from home for a classroom teacher is very, very difficult, but like all businesses, whether it's a nurse, you could equally say struggles to work from home, we do expect employers to be able to find ways to support their staff to be at work, and whether that's working from home or whether it's working not in direct line with children, that would be depending on their personal medical circumstances. So we will be producing more refined, more nuanced guidance in the next short while, so that people can have a look at that, see how it affects them, because as the virus has developed, so has our knowledge and understanding, and some people we thought who weren't quite as at great risk are not as at great risk, and others we feel are at slightly higher risk. So that more nuanced guidance will come out, and people will be able to look at that, determine how it affects them, and of course, as the First Minister said, we expect employers to take heed of that.
Thanks. Georgina Hayes from the Telegraph.
Thank you, First Minister. Just to pick up on the potential for hospitality businesses to take legal action against local authorities, a cafe in Glasgow this week successfully won a legal challenge against the City Council by using the cafe exemption. So I'm just wondering, if more businesses try to use this cafe exemption to stay open, will the Scottish Government consider removing it altogether and closing cafes? And also, hospitality leaders have said that how this exemption is interpreted and enforced seems to depend on the local authority. So will the Scottish Government be providing some more clarity and guidance so that there's a bit more coherence in how this exemption is enforced?
We'll continue to take decisions that we think are appropriate, and we'll use learning from things that have gone before in doing that. But beyond that, I'm not going to say more about the detail of that, because we haven't taken those decisions, other than to reflect on the fact that the issue around cafes comes about because we didn't do what we initially intended to do, which was just make all licensed cafes close. If we had done that, we wouldn't have this situation, but because we tried, which I think is the right thing to do, to allow flexibility, we end up in this position, that's fine. That's as I say, the job of government. But you know, if people within what we're having to do here, if we're to have flexibilities, it does mean that we have to ask people to exercise within the spirit, to operate within the spirit of those flexibilities, because it makes it harder to give them if it just leads to everybody trying to sort of run through what they see as a loophole. And that's not easy, and I don't blame people for trying to do that, but it undermines what we've all got to do right now, which is limit that human interaction that allows the virus to spread. Beyond that, obviously I'm not going to comment on legal action beyond what I said earlier on. Kenny McBride from Broadcasting Scotland.
Thank you, First Minister. At Broadcasting Scotland, we've been examining case numbers and mortality rates quite closely, and we think we've observed a doubling in case mortality over the last few weeks. I was wondering, is that reflected in the Scottish Government's analysis? And if so, what does it mean? And also, we reported last night on a new mass screening technique that's been developed at Edinburgh Uni. I wonder, is the Scottish Government looking at that and other types of research into new testing methods to try and get to some level of mass screening?
We are looking at new technology and with a view to deploying as soon as possible new technology all of the time. I mean, we are currently evaluating and about to go into use point of care testing that we've spoken about previously. So there's lots of new technologies that we are looking at. I couldn't comment on the first part of your question because I'm not sure what it is. It doesn't immediately strike me as something I would agree with or think is reflected in the Scottish Government's figures. I don't know, Fiona might want to say a bit more, but I'm not going to comment on modelling that you've done without seeing that modelling.
And I think to reassure you, what we do is look at mortality, we look at our hospital admissions, we look at infection rates, we look at place of infection. So we take a very broad view and holistic view about the data and the information we see, and that then influences both the Scottish Government modelling, but then that influences the decisions we would make about the advice we would give to government.
You want to go back, Kenny?
Sorry, could we possibly get a look at what mortality index you do use?
Look, I'll have statisticians look at that. Most of the data we use is published. It's on the Public Health Scotland website, which is presumably what you've taken it for. And this is my fault, Kenny, not yours, because for all I sometimes perhaps try to sound as if I am, I'm not a public health expert, so I'd need to understand exactly what you were asking for before I could say whether it was possible for us to give it to you. So I'll ask our statisticians to have a look at your question and see whether there is more information we could provide as a result of that. Thanks very much. That concludes the questions today. Thanks to all the journalists for joining us. Thank you to Jason Leitch for providing the substance for many of their questions. And thanks to Rachel and Fiona. What can I say other than what I've been trying to say all along? This gets harder, and it gets harder as we go into winter. It gets harder as we all start to think about Christmas, a time of the year that we'd normally be looking forward to spending time with family and friends and doing things out of the ordinary. And I know how tough it is to be contemplating a period where all of these things we love doing might be less possible than they are normally. All I can say right now, because I'm not going to just give false assurance to say the things I know people want to hear to make it easier for me standing at this podium. I'm going to continue to try to be frank with you every step of the way. And at the moment, that means being very, very firm that the best chance of getting as much normality over the Christmas period as possible is for all of us to abide by these restrictions and all of the guidance right now. It doesn't give 100% guarantees, but it absolutely maximises our chances of driving the infection down now so that it opens up the opportunity for us to interact a bit more normally at a later stage. So please remember to do all the things we're asking you to do, not visit each other's houses just now, in the hope that by making that sacrifice now, we might have a little bit more potential for that kind of interaction around Christmas. Make sure you're working from home if you can. Don't car share, and remember all of the advice encapsulated in facts. And to hospitality and other businesses affected, I am really sorry you are going through this right now. We will do everything we can to support you, but know that these decisions are not being taken lightly. I'll be back tomorrow at 12:15. We will have the publication tomorrow of the strategic framework that you've heard me talking about, which will include in draft form, because we're going to do some consultation up until a parliamentary debate that will take place next week, but in draft form, the proposed levels of intervention that might apply in future. So I will say more about that tomorrow. In the meantime, thanks for joining us today.